still Saturday. Time for the next video. I know it's the next day for you. We're going to talk about fertility rates and some other statistics that relate to population growth. But first, a little bit of a review from the last video. Here's a little review. Recall that the crude birth rate is the number of births per 1,000 individuals in the population. The crude death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000. Alright, when we subtract the birth rate from the death rate per 1,000 and then divide that by 10, we get a percentage. We get the global population growth rate. Also recall that growth rates vary and that a very, very high population growth rate for humans is 2%. 1% is steady growth. Of course, in the United States, we're a little bit less than 1%. Worldwide, it's about 1.3%. And we can take those percents and we can divide them into 70, use the rule of 70 to estimate how long the population will take to double. Alright, today we talk about fertility rates. The total fertility rate is the number of babies per woman. And I'm sorry to tell you guys this, but the fact is when it comes to many of these population statistics, we are spectators. Oh, don't get me wrong, when it comes to fertility rates, we were around, but just once. The whole rest of the deal is all about women. It's how well they take care of themselves during their pregnancy. It's about how they deliver their babies at the end of their pregnancy. And there's a key video that I'll show you in the classroom tomorrow that's called The Role of Religion. Very, very interesting topic. Again, because of this emphasis on women in our population. The graph here just kind of shows you where we might end up in terms of number of people on the planet. You know we're at 7 billion now. And we could end up as high as 10 or 11 billion by the turn of the century. But we might actually control our birth rate and not go up quite so high. In fact, we might even see a little bit of a die-off or a die-back, as it's called. A crash in population because of some unforeseen situation, perhaps climate change. Either way, you can see that our J-curve is beginning to turn into an S-curve. Total fertility rate, the number of babies per woman, and sometimes you'll be amazed to see some of these statistics depending on where we are around the world. There are countries in sub-Saharan Africa where the TFR is 5 or 6. Can you imagine? That's the average per woman. Number of babies per woman, 5 or 6. That means for every woman that decides to only have 2 kids, there's somebody else having 8 or 10. Just remarkable. Okay, here's another interesting statistic for you. It's called replacement level fertility. And just like the name indicates, replacement level fertility is the number of babies it takes to replace you and your spouse. After all, if you want to keep your country going and keep your country alive, you have to replace yourselves in the population during your fertile years. So sometime between the ages of 15 and 44, a couple ought to have 2 kids to replace themselves. That would keep population growth at 0, though, right? So we always have a little bit higher replacement level fertility than the number of people in the couple. So for instance, here in the United States, our replacement level fertility is 2.1. In most of the more economically developed countries, the MEDCs is about 1.6. For LEDCs, it's about 3.1. So you get an idea of the differences when it comes to replacement level fertility. Why do fertility rates vary so much country to country? Well, there's a lot of factors. Role of religion is one. For instance, you may live in a country where birth control is frowned upon, perhaps by your religion. There's a way of life. In many of these developing countries, you need extra children to help supplement the income of the family. Or there's no safety net for people if they live to be older. They need to have several children so that the children can take care of them in their old age. The cost of raising children is a factor. Infant mortality, the number of babies that die unexpectedly in the first year of birth. And another key role in total fertility is how old the woman is before she has her first baby. Statistics show us that the longer a woman waits to have her first child, the less children she'll have. And of course, another factor in fertility rates is the available of reliable birth control. In many developing countries, birth control is not readily available to a woman or to the guy. In developed countries, birth control is as close as the pharmacy. I think I already covered this. Fertility and life expectancy differ based on these two groups. So you can imagine all of the different reasons why that is. We're going to talk about life expectancy next. And life expectancy, along with infant mortality, are the two most important statistics when it comes to showing the quality of life for a country. Now let's go to this graphic here. It just shows you some of the worldwide fertility rates comparing 1950 to 2002. And you can see there's been a big difference, a big decline in just about every statistic when it comes to 1950 to today. And yet our population is still booming. Imagine what the future would be for planet Earth and the number of people on Earth if the world had continued to have a fertility rate up around 5. It was that way in the 50s. It's down to 2.8 now. In the developed countries, it was always much lower, and now it's down to 1.6. And again, if you think of this in terms of replacement level fertility, that's not even replacing the two parents. The developing countries, well, you can see way larger. Africa, very large. You get the idea. These statistics now should start to make sense to you. Fertility rate is the number of children per woman. In Europe, the average woman has 2.6 kids, or had 2.6 kids in 1950. Now it's down to 1.4. Again, not even meeting replacement level fertility. All right, life expectancy. You've all heard statistics about life expectancy. We talk about it in terms of male versus female. It's totally analyzed on sex. We know that women live on average about 7 years longer than men do. Life expectancy around the world can be very, very different. There are countries, again, in Sub-Saharan Africa where the life expectancy is 45, 48, maybe 50 years old. There are countries in Africa where I'd be dead if I was there now. Of course, that's just on average, but you get the idea. Life expectancy is a measure of the quality of life in a country. If people are not living to a ripe old age, for instance, here in the United States, we have a life expectancy of 78. It's because life is very, very hard in these countries with a low life expectancy. They don't have good health care. They don't have good running water. They don't have a reliable water supply. They don't have good sanitation. So for all of these reasons, diseases impact them much more than in a developed country. And as a result, people don't live as long. The color graphic here kind of gives you an idea. Even in South America, many countries where the life expectancy is not that great. Russia, below us. China's up in the early 70s, and the global average for life expectancy, 68. Another very important statistic is infant mortality rate. We don't usually talk about child mortality rate that much. Infant mortality rate, and in this statistic, infant is defined as the first year of life. And you can see once again, even though these developing countries around the world have many, many more babies per woman, they also have a much higher infant mortality rate for two reasons. Not good prenatal care for the mom, and of course once the baby's born, they don't have access to all of the health care that they need during the first year of life. The global rate for infant mortality is 49 per thousand. That's 4.9%. 5 out of every 100 babies doesn't make it. Ours, of course, is pretty darn good, 6.6 per thousand. But you might be surprised to know that there are some 30 developed countries that are ahead of us when it comes to infant mortality rate. Now, I'd like you to take a few minutes and bring to class tomorrow your thoughts as to why you think over 30 countries around the world would have an infant mortality rate lower than ours. And when I say lower, that would make it much better. Better than ours. What is it about life in America that would have our infant mortality rate higher than 30 some other countries? There are other things that are happening to influence population size besides what we've talked about so far. And again, here's my favorite one. I pound this into your heads. The status of women is a big deal when it comes to influencing population size. Migration, people moving into your country, is a big deal when it comes to influencing population size. This is exactly what's happening in some countries, for instance, France. Good example. They have opened the floodgates for people to move into their country because they're in negative growth. They need to find other ways to get people to come to their country and to support their tax base. Aging, of course, is a factor, and disease. This graphic here shows you the number of people in millions that are infected with the HIV virus. And so diseases play a very big role. It controls our life expectancy. And this graphic here shows you the number of people, and you can see where AIDS is predominant. And it is in the sub-Saharan African countries, which is, where we believe it came from in the first place. This is a new topic. It's the fourth factor that I showed you in the very first video that has something to do with population size, and it's called age structure. You will see these on the ACE exam. You will see these on the AP exam, and you need to be able to look at them and decipher them. You need to be able to tell, for instance, that this graphic is a graphic of a developing country, a country with high population growth. Let me help you understand how this graph works. First of all, please notice that the x-axis is divided up to two sides, and the sides are male and female. So we can see that, first of all. The second thing is, you won't always see the population listed in millions. You might see it listed in thousands. You might see it listed as a percent. In this case, since it is individuals in the millions, let's take a look at the graphic. Each one of these horizontal bands is an age group. The bottommost is 0 to 4. The next one is 5 to 9. The next one is 10 to 14, and so on as you go up these horizontal bars. You see each one of these horizontal bars. And you'll notice a few things of interest. And the reason that I can tell just by looking at this age structure diagram that this is a developing country, a country that has a high reproductive rate, is because look at all of these people in the lowest brackets, especially the dark green. These are little kids that are not even of reproductive age yet. What happens when they get to reproductive age? There's going to be a big difference in what happens as we move up. They're going to have their 3, 4, 5 kids, and that's going to keep the base of the age structure diagram wide. And that's the key thing to look for. Look for the shape of this age structure diagram, and it tells you what kind of country it is. This is definitely a developing country, and they are in the midst of a baby boom. They are going to have lots and lots of kids. Now here's a picture of our, here in the United States, population structure diagram. And you can see something interesting. Notice that most of these age bands, they're about the same size. We don't have the big wide bottom like we saw in India. This is an indication of a country that is in slow growth. A country in slow growth. And of course you should notice a few other things that don't surprise you. Notice that in this age band, here's one right here, from 80 to 84, this age band, we have more females than we have males. And that should not surprise you because, as we've stated, women on average live longer than men do, even here in the United States. So as you get further up here, you're going to see more females in the graph than you are going to see males. Germany is a country that's in negative growth. And the key thing for you to notice about a country in negative growth is that its base is smaller than the middle is. We don't have a straight up and down scenario like we did with the United States. Instead, we have a big, wider base right here. This tells us that there are more middle-aged people than there are young people. And when these young people get old enough to reproduce, there's just not enough of them, even if they have many, many babies. There's just not enough of them to take care of these older people. And as these older people work their way all the way up to the top, we will see further examples of negative growth. So, the India example, rapid growth. The US example, slow growth. And the Germany example, negative growth. And they show us China here. China's an interesting case. It's sort of a case all by itself. And the reason that it's a case all by itself is because it's been trying to control its population for the last 50 years. So we see some kind of banding here that got the policy started, and as a result of the one-child policy, their base is lower than their middle-aged people.
The population of a country consists of people of different ages: babies, middle-aged persons, and senior citizens. The proportion of a population at different age levels is its age structure. This age structure can be represented by a diagram called a population pyramid. This type of diagram shows a relative number of males and females of different age levels. The age levels in the pyramid can be grouped into three main categories. The first, representing ages up to 14, is called the pre-reproductive category. Ages 15 to 44 make up the reproductive category. And the post-reproductive category include those aged 45 or greater. There are four generalized structures that a population pyramid can take. The first is the rapid growth structure, where most of the population is relatively young. This pattern is common among developing countries. The second is the slow growth structure, where the younger age groups are slightly larger. The United States is in a slow growth structure. The third structure represents zero growth. Here, there is no difference between younger and older age groups. Some European countries, such as Austria and Spain, have zero growth structures. The last is the negative growth structure, where the younger age groups are smaller than older age groups. Germany is an example of a negative growth country. Countries usually show some deviations from the generalized structures. Such deviations can be seen in the population pyramids for the United States from 1950 to 2020. For example, a small population decrease representing the Depression years of the 1930s can be noted. But more noticeable is the population bulge representing the baby boom following World War II. These baby boomers produced their own echo baby boom during the 1980s. The projected future trends in the United States suggest continued slow growth. The population of a country consists of people of different ages: babies, middle-aged persons, and senior citizens.
Okay, I think that's a good place to stop because this theory of demographic transition is its own very special and different concept. So, learn your population pyramids. Recognize when you look at one, and I promise you, I've already written exam number 2. AP people, your essay is going to be based on age structure diagrams. ACE people, guess what? Same is true for you. All right, it's getting close to game time. Have yourselves a nice evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.